afternoon and welcome to this Getting Started with Supercore webinar. My name is Kerry and I am the AAC Implementation Manager for Smartbox. We're going to spend approximately the next 30 minutes having a tour of Supercore and its features. If at any point you've got any questions, please just type them in the chat box, and if it's anything we've not covered throughout the webinar, we will answer them at the end. So let's get started. So for those of you that don't know, Supercore is a core vocabulary available in Grid 3 and Grid for iPad. By core vocabulary, we're talking about 80% of the language that we use to construct our sentences. So lots and lots of important words. Supercore vocabulary has 54 locations, 54 cells, and it's designed predominantly for AAC learners who are getting started with AAC. So just to give you a bit more sort of an overview of those AAC learners, it's aimed towards children 0 to 12 years roughly. It's going to be learners that are using symbols because Supercore is a symbol-based system. It's designed to take our users from single word sentences and allow them to develop into more complex grammar. It's also designed to be easy for the learner and their communication partners that are going to be supporting them, and that's obviously really important. The focus is on building communication, but within functional and motivating activities, and we'll take a look at those partway through the webinar. It's available in widget, PCS, and symbol stick, so whichever symbol set you're using. It's suitable for any access method. And for those learners where 54 cells might be too much to start with, there are Supercore learning grids available for very early AAC learners, and I'll show you those at the end if we have time. So looking at the core vocabulary then, I'm going to drop into grid 3 in a second. What you can see on the screen in front of you is the home grid of Supercore. So the core vocabulary, which I mentioned before, makes up 80% of the language that we use when we're building sentences and communicating, is made up of 32 words. If I go into grid 3, what you can see here is the core vocabulary from left to right. It covers these cells across here and here. So from left to right, it's organised roughly in the way that you would organise a sentence. The colour is based loosely on the Fitzgerald key, which many of you may be familiar with. On the left-hand side in the yellow columns, we've got pronouns, so our people words. The green cells here are the verbs or our action words. The blue cells are our adjectives and describing words. And then the grey cells are our little words. What you'll notice down the bottom is that we've got plus to add additional words for each section of language. So if I want to have more verbs, I can go into more actions, more describing words for more adjectives, and more pronouns. I would go into the plus where it says people. The idea behind the core vocabulary is that it enables us to build most of our sentence from this screen. So if I was going to type
I
like this,
like this.
I don't need to navigate away to build my sentence. If we build another one,
I want
I want
to
to see,
see it.
I want to see it. Again, I don't need to navigate away. So all of my main language is constructed on one screen. And that's really important so that our users aren't having to constantly flip back between one page and another when they're trying to communicate. One of the things that's important to notice if you look at the top screen is that some of our cells don't have symbols with them. And that's to support literacy. We have many, many users who, whilst they're developing the AAC, are also developing literacy. And I'll talk about more supports later on. But what you can see here is that we've got selective use of symbols. And that's because many of these words, to, be, for example, are words that don't require the user to have a symbol because they're such small words. So actually, they may as well learn the grapheme or the shape of the word rather than the symbol itself. On the top here, you can see that there's 5 lilac coloured cells. Those cells are our useful next word cells. These actually give our users access to 55 additional core words, and they're set across the top so they can be accessed at all times, and they are preset with most commonly used useful next words. So if we have, for example, I select
I,
I can see now it's changed, and I can select really.
really, like, this,
Okay, and we can also have
I want,
I want
one,
one. The idea behind the useful next words is that it enables our learners to build their sentences and communicate more quickly, and give them access again to more core words without having to add more cells to the top screen. I just clear that. On the right hand side here, you can see that we have got what we call dynamic columns. So there's 2 columns on the right hand side. These are designed mostly to work alongside the core vocabulary, and they give us access to more specific vocabulary whilst we're using the core. It's got activity specific vocabulary at the top, so where we've got daily and play, for example, but it also down the bottom gives us access to topic words, for example. Here you can see there's a range of topics that would be useful to our younger learners. I'll go into animals, for example. And that you can, from the left to right, they're organized in terms of the words that you're going to use most commonly. So I have a 3-year-old, so dog, horse, cow, sheep, mouse, cat. All of that language on the left hand side is commonly used language. And then as you get over to the right hand side, it's slightly less frequently used, but still going to be quite high up in order of frequency. I definitely recommend spending some time looking through the topics in Supercore and just familiarising yourself with the different language that's in there. Other things to be aware of then in the dynamic columns, we've got messages down the bottom here. If I go into messages, you can see that the look is slightly different. This is to give our users access to preset messages that they can use really quickly. You've got the tabs down the bottom here, so ask, say, talk, go. If I go into the help tab, for example, it opens out language which is going to be useful for learners to access quickly if they need to create a message, so something's
something's
wrong,
wrong,
anything that they need to say quite quickly, and particularly in a situation where they may not have the time to construct the message from scratch. Quick messages, you'll notice there's lots of blanks on here. The assumption is that you'll be able to edit these and add in quick messages that are appropriate for the individual. The important thing then at the top of the dynamic columns, which I mentioned earlier, are the activity specific language. The activity specific language is designed to provide functional and motivational language for our learners in a specific context. So, what we've done is put commonly used context in these 2 areas. So, if I go into daily, for example, you can see we've got contexts like toilet, shopping, learning, dressing, sleeping, lots of contexts where our learners could be using all sorts of language to develop their AAC whilst also it providing a function. What you'll notice is when I go into the language, the 2 columns on the right hand side have changed, but the core vocabulary has stayed the same. And that's really important for our learners, that they've still got access to the core vocabulary as they're learning to build their messages. I can use just the 2 right hand columns if I want to build a message. So I could say
choose, story,
choose story. I could say
sleep,
sleep time.
time,
But for those learners who are starting to move from single or two word utterances into building more sentences, we can start to combine the activity specific language on the right hand side with the core vocabulary on the left.
I want. Story. Now.
I want story now. Um, the nice thing about these daily activities is that it really gives us the opportunity to use the language and help a learner learn how to use their AAC vocabulary in lots and lots of different contexts that they're going to come across every day. So there's lots of opportunities there to be practicing our AAC. Again, with the play, we've tried to pick play topics which children are commonly doing at some point in the day, at some point in the week. A favourite in our house is bubbles. And again, you'll notice that the language on the right hand side in the two right hand columns have changed, but the core vocabulary on the left remains the same. So I can have a combination of either just using the two right hand columns or combining it as I did before with the core vocabulary.
Blow. Bubbles. Again.
Blow bubbles again.
I want. More. Bubbles.
I want more bubbles. The play topics there, there's quite a lot of them. So you can see there's a more arrow on the bottom right hand side. And that takes you through to some additional topics, which are definitely worth having a look through and finding the ones that are appropriate to your learner and also the ones that are going to motivate them. I'm just going to go home. The other thing to bear in mind that I mentioned briefly before, when you're looking at Supercore, think about the literacy supports that are in there. So lots of our learners, as I've already said, that are learning AAC are also starting to learn literacy. They're starting to learn very early literacy skills and experience books for the first time, join in, learning about text, learning about sounds. So what we've tried to do is put some very basic supports in Supercore to work alongside the learner's literacy development. So I've already mentioned here that some of the cells don't have symbols on, particularly for the smaller words, because it's just as easy for the learner at that point to learn the shape of the word as it would be to learn the symbol. The other thing that you'll notice is that we have the word written above the symbol. And this can be changed if you really need to for a specific reason. But the main reason behind this is when we're modeling, so when we're showing our user how to build a sentence or build a phrase, for example, in their vocabulary, if I put my finger, which you won't be able to see, but if I put my finger on the want cell, if the want was below the picture, what would happen is I would actually cover up the word and they just have the symbol. Whereas actually, if I can point, it's the symbol that would be potentially covered up and the word would remain. So we're helping our learner recognize the word more than the symbol, which is what we want when we're developing literacy. The other thing that's in here, down the bottom right hand side, is a phonic keyboard. So if you go into spelling, we've got a keyboard here which gives our user access and the opportunity to just play with sound. And quite often we know that our AAC learners don't have the opportunity to play with sounds in the same way that children who aren't using AAC do.
A, B, K.
So the sounds behind this are pre-recorded sounds. If you wanted to change them and record them in a different voice than your own voice, you can do. This page is purely designed for the user to be able to play with sounds. If they want to create basic CVC words, so consonant, vowel, consonant words, they can do.
A,
But it is designed for very, very early literacy, but definitely worth exploring. There's other supports like letter of the day in here as well that you can edit according to what the learner's working on at any given point in time. So
Cat.
the other fun thing in here that I just wanted to draw your attention to that will help support literacy is if I go into the school grid and I go into stories, I can see all my language around reading a story. And here, if I go into more, what you can see is that I've got access to language taken from commonly read stories with our younger users. If I go into We're Going on a Bear Hunt, which many of you may be familiar with, I've got the language in here that a user would need to join in the reading of this particular book. And when we're talking about early literacy skills, this is really important. We need our learners to be able to request a repeated reading. So on the right hand side, you can see I've still kept my story vocabulary. So again, for example, or read again. We also need our users to be able to join in those repeated lines, to be able to say, uh-oh, grass, swishy swashy grass. They need to be able to join in the same way that their peers would, because repeated lines and repeated reading is so important in terms of early literacy development. So we've put in some of the vocabulary from the most perhaps commonly read books that we find with our younger users. You'll also notice that you've got 3 blank grids in here. If I go into the blank grid, you've got the language remains the reading language on the right hand side, and then if you go into edit mode, you've got the opportunity to fill in the story specific language here. Again, I'd recommend that you go into the story section and look at the books that are available. Okay, I'm just going to go into Grid Explorer and show you the learning grids. So quite often we recognise that 54 cells can be quite a large place to start for some of our younger learners who may also be struggling with developing their access at the same time as learning AAC. The Supercore learning grids excuse me, are based on the daily and play activities that you saw in the dynamic columns. So you've got here 12 cells and 20 cells. So if I go into the sleeping that we looked at earlier, in a 12 cell, you can see that I've got access on the left hand side to some core vocabulary. And on the right hand side here, I've got some of the language that was available in the dynamic columns before. So
choose,
things like choose story is still
story,
there,
read,
read, sleep now that we had.
sleep, time,
And I again can start to combine that with the language on the left hand side. If I go home and we have a look at the sleeping in the 20 cell, you can see now that I've got 2 rows of the core vocabulary available to me and a little bit more of the activity specific language on the right hand side. So I can start to build up and progress from 12 to 20 cells before I start to look at these activities in the main supercore vocabulary. What you can see here, if I flick back into supercore, is where we've got want, stop, like, good and more, and I and you. If I go back into supercore, so I go back through Grid Explorer, on the home grid, we've tried to keep the language in similar locations. So here we've still got want, stop, and like, good and more, and I and you, similar locations, but have obviously been expanded with language between it. There's lots and lots to look at in Supercore, and if we had an hour or more, I could go through it in lots of detail. But this is just designed to be a tour. One thing which I thought was really important to just flag while we were going through this is how we can support our learners um, to learn their AAC system, because it's all very well going through and knowing how it works and what's in there if we haven't got actually the ability to support them. So on our website is a blog series available called Simple AAC. Now, Simple AAC is a way that you can go through and look at a range of different techniques to support our learners. And it might be that you just focus on one technique at a time, but what you'll find is it will help you to understand and learn the vocabulary system, and it will also help you to develop the learning skills. So I'm going to go through them really quickly, but I definitely recommend, you can see at the bottom, going onto our website and having a look at the blog series. So the first one is about show, excuse me, and that's about pointing to the symbols as you talk, so modeling the language for the learner. So when you're saying, I want more, or do you want more, making sure that you're pointing to the language in Supercore to show them where the language is. Secondly, which is fairly obvious, is about keeping things interesting, keeping it motivating and fun. And that's where the Supercore play activity grids are going to be really important. Find an activity that really motivates your learner, that they find interesting, and use that as a way to help them develop their AAC and enjoy using Supercore. Months and months. So we know that learning AAC takes lots of time. It takes lots of time for children who aren't using AAC to develop speech. So it's really important not to expect to see them developing their language straight away, and that we're taking little steps. Pause. Oh, excuse me, I'm just going to have to pause to cough. Hold on. Okay, excuse me. Pausing is about giving our learners time to respond. So, not feeling that they have to produce a message in a really short space of time, that we're giving them thinking time, we're giving them time to locate the language and time to select the appropriate cells. So, try counting to 10 is one example. Don't be afraid of the silence while we're giving the learner the opportunity. The next one is the language. So think about the different types of words. So think about describing words and action words and more. So not just nouns. We know that children use sort of noun-based language for a very, very small amount of time, and then they start to move into action words. So going from saying daddy to daddy go, daddy come, daddy play, daddy sit. So the action words and describing words become quite a big part of language very early on. So we need to provide our AAC learners with the right language to help them develop. E stands for explore, so give learners time to explore their device and babble. That means we have to let them press the words and we need to respond to them. So if they press the word go, we need to walk off around the corner so that they understand the word go. So by doing that, letting them explore, it gives us the opportunity to teach the language, and it gives them the opportunity to learn where the language is in their vocabulary. A stands for always available, and obviously, if they don't have access to their AAC, they can't learn to use it. This can be high tech or low tech. So, although Supercore is built as a high tech grid set, there are available to download from the website low tech grids for Supercore and Supercore learning grids, and you can also print from within Grid 3 any grid within Supercore that you might want to use. But it's really important, and those daily grids that we looked at earlier really emphasize why different opportunities that you would have for to make AAC always available. The next one is add words. So add a word to what the learner says. If they say one word, repeat it back with another word. So if they say more, we'd say more, want more. And what we're doing here is slowly extending their vocabulary. The last one is comment. So don't constantly ask questions that you know the answer to, because the learner doesn't need to be quizzed. Instead, say the answer or simply comment on what's happening. Commenting is a really important part of the language that we use every day, so model that to our learners and comment as part of the communication with them. Okay. So that was a whistle stop tour of Supercore vocabulary. Um, if you want to know more about Supercore, there's loads of different resources on the Smartbox website. You can find out information about the Simple AAC blog, and you can download low-tech Supercore resources. But if you do want more information, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm hoping that that tour, even though it was very brief, has given you an idea of how to get started. Just for 5 minutes that we've got left, or 3 minutes, I'm just going to have a look at the questions that we've got and try and answer any of them. Okay, looks like we've gone through most of it so far. If you think of anything after you've logged off, please don't hesitate to contact us. My email address there, or come straight to Smartbox Support. Thank you very much for joining me, and good luck with Supercore.